Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you back for our evening session. I am so excited about where we've come so far. I've loved the questions that we've received. The Q&A times have been great. As we move into this evening session on problem solving, I want to talk to you about the tools required to do what we asked you to do in the second session today. That is, think differently. That one kind of left you on a cliff because it gave you the reality that you need to think differently, and it didn't give you any tools to do so. But that's what this session is all about. Problem solving. Transforming your reality through focused application. Again, I don't want to bore you with my assumptions, but here they are again. There are people listening online, so I want to at least skim over those for them, but we've already unpacked all of those here in the room. But you're big boys and girls, that's number one. You're big boys and girls and can handle frank conversation and introspection. Number two, you're spiritual men and women who love Jesus and can see the spiritual implications of these lessons. Three, you are open to the simplest of concepts and will seek a minimum of one transformational truth. And four, you are committed to walk a journey of excellence and take others with you. And here's our pain quote. Every leader can avoid the pain of leadership if they are able to see problems before they surface. Furthermore, they must be able to evaluate, diagnose, and prescribe an ideal solution. The problem with most leaders is that they see surface issues as the problem, and the problem is always several layers deeper. The leader that fails to dig deep enough to uncover the root of the problem is simply prolonging the inevitable devastation of a faulty diagnosis. Every leader must possess the skill set necessary to solve the true problems that seek to derail their success. So I want to remind you, in the last session, I talked about that time I flew over the Nazca, the Atacama Desert at Nazca with the Nazca lines, and I talked about how Edward de Bono's book likened the brain to a warm block of jello that thoughts, warm water pours over, and those thoughts cut deep into the jello, and eventually the warm water runs only through the ruts that are cut within the jello, and how thoughts only run in the deeply ingrained patterns that are in our brain, and it's very difficult to jump out of those ruts to have creative thoughts. I talked about how the erosion off of the plateau at Nazca was so prominent, but you had to come up out of those ruts to see the creative expression. I could see it all from the air, but if you were attacking Nazca from the ground, you had to work your way up out of the ruts to be able to see the creative expression at the plateau. What a great analogy for what we're talking about today. So I want to make a few blanket statements to set the foundation for what we're going to talk about today, the tools that I'm going to give you today. Number one, once a mindset has taken root, it is difficult to dislodge. Think about the difficulty Jesus had changing the early disciples' Messiah mindset, right? They expected him to come as a conquering king. They had to live with him. They had to see him before they understood the whole concept of a humble king, a suffering servant. They didn't get it. And even at the end, they didn't get it. In fact, the Jews still don't get it today, because their ruts were cut so deeply in their social consciousness that they could never jump out of that to see God's amazing creative solution to the depravity of humanity. And we run that risk. If we are incapable of jumping out of the ruts of our everyday behaviors, if we can't jump out of the ruts of mediocrity to find some creative expression, we're sunk in terms of leading our organizations forward. The primary way to dislodge a mindset is to present it with overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Think about intervention. Think about the person that's in the abyss of addiction. They personally know it's wrong. Many of the people they encounter in life tell them that they're wrong and extend a hand out to help, yet still they only do what is best for them in the moment. And some, over time, with constant bombardment from family and friends, they realize it and they do what they can. They have whatever it takes within themselves to take all that overwhelming evidence to the contrary, and they're able to propel themselves out of that lifestyle with the help of others. But it's a long, arduous task of friends and family presenting overwhelming evidence to the contrary of how detrimental it is to their life. Sometimes it takes even more than that. Sometimes it takes a brutal awakening. Think about a hardcore intervention. Everybody gets together, confronts that issue, confronts that individual with how it's impacting not only the life of the addict, but the life of everyone around them. And they prescribe conditions and they inform of consequences. And eventually that overwhelming evidence of their station in life becomes clear, and they take that first step towards getting out of the rut of their behaviors into a creative, problem-solving new life, a transformative life, a life full of possibilities. Most mindsets will only change gradually after repeated exposure to new information and a willingness to shift perspective. Think about racial discrimination. Think how far we've come in 200 years. Think about the social fabric, the social mentality, the social acceptance of slavery 200 years ago. Think about how ethically and morally many did not even consider that wrong. And think how it's taken 200 years to get to the point where 99.99999% of the people absolutely know that it's wrong. Think about the steps it took to get there. Step after step, rut after rut, climbed out of through the civil rights movement, through voices, black and white, speaking about the inequity, and eventually arriving where we are today. Not perfect, but amazingly reconciled. Most mindsets will only change gradually after repeated exposure to new information and a willingness to shift perspective. So let's start with the most basic of shifts that need to happen in most leaders. The leadership continuum for change moves one from managerial leadership to transformative leadership. And transformative leadership basically takes two paths, adaptive or truly creative. Now, let me preface by saying only one is truly creative. Only God creates ex nihilo, right? Out of nothing. Only God has that ability. You don't, I don't. You think you came up with a new idea ever? I hate to burst your bubble, but chances are not. It was at some level adaptive. It may have been adaptive creative, but as the scriptures say, there's nothing new under the sun. So let's talk about this continuum. How do we move from managerial to transformative in our leadership? Because managerial creates stability, right? And transformative leadership creates advancement. So I want to talk to you about an epiphany I had, again, South America. I'm in Aguascalientes, which is the small town just outside of Machu Picchu. And my brother and I were hiking the Machu Picchu trail to go to Machu Picchu, but this night we're in a hotel at the launching point for one incredible adventure, 2 days on the peak of Machu Picchu. Now, I had heard the managerial analogy of the thermostat before, but let me tell you the epiphany I had that early that next morning. Getting up early before the sun even rose. The alarm went off. I wanted to kill the alarm. I peeked through the crack in my eyelids and I looked over towards the wall, and there, sitting on top of the luggage rack, you know, those things you fold out in your hotel room, were my boots. I had set them the night before. And then just above that was the thermostat. And so I recalled the managerial thing because I'm a problem solver. I look at everything in life, and it drives my wife absolutely crazy, but I look at everything and I say, how do I make that better? First question that comes to my mind in everything I see. It drives me nuts sometimes. So I'm looking at this thermostat, and this was long before the days of Wi-Fi connected thermostats. This was long before the days of smart homes. And I'm thinking to myself, that is something that needs to be improved. Unfortunately, I didn't go any further than that. I would probably have a better station in life had I chosen to really apply some of what we're going to learn today to that question in that hotel room. But here's where my mind did go. I looked at that thermostat and I thought, that's exactly what a manager does, right? He applies all his energy, all his work, everything that he does, he only activates to keep things the same. The status quo is exactly what the thermostat is tasked with doing. It turns on when things get out of line and brings it back to the same. And then I glance down to my boots and I think those boots take me into an unknown, uncharted future. And I thought, that's the leader. That was my leadership epiphany. That's the leader I want to be. I want to be the boots. Every individual needs to choose to be a manager or a leader. The choice is well represented by those two items. The thermostat, it works diligently, never ceasing, with one purpose: to keep the environment the same. And the boots, their single purpose is to explore the environment and provide safety as the environment changes. I want to be the boot. So let's think about creativity. Let's think about forcing ourselves outside of deeply ingrained patterns for transformational change. Let me ask you this question: where do creative ideas come from? I promise you, they don't come from nowhere. They come from the sum of your life experience, what you've experienced in life, the problems that you've solved previously. They come from creative ideas that you hear from others. It comes from a hodgepodge of input and data, or you could say it comes from the noise of your life, but you need to bring clarity to that noise. I want to give you a circle of process, and I want you to think, as you look at this circle of process, I want you to think of it as a process by which you climb out of your ruts to realize your creative expression on the plateau. Creative solutions always begin with a problem, right? The problem is we misdefine the problem, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. You need to make sure you're working on the right problem. Many leaders don't dig deep enough to find out what the root of the problem really is. They take the Band-Aid, they see the Band-Aid, and they see the Band-Aid as the problem. And if you're solving the Band-Aid, you're leaving the wound to fester. We need to dig deeper into what the problem is. Then, once we've identified what the problem is, we need to find out what others have done to solve that problem. And then use that as a foundational base for new information, for new possibilities. Then we need to play around with ideas. You have ideas, he has ideas, she has ideas, we all have ideas. We need to come together. We need to play around with new ideas around the process, around the problem. Then we need to give the subconscious time to work. How many of you have gone to bed with something vexing you? You've wrestled with it all day, you're frustrated, you're stressed, you can't even sleep. You're up late because you're trying to process through a problem. Then you go to bed and you wake up in the middle of the night, or you wake up in the morning and there it is. You've had your epiphany. That's the way the brain works. It's so rutted by your experience in early childhood development that if you force yourself to come up with stuff, you're just driving yourself deeper into the rut. You need to take a rest. You need to back off the problem and rise above it for your epiphany. Then you need to formulate those thoughts into a new idea. You need to formulate them into a possible scenario, a possible solution. You need to formulate and say, what if we did this? And then you need to redefine your problem and begin again. I said I want you to look at this loop as a driver to get you out of your ruts onto the plateau of a creative solution. But let me put it this way to you. There are 5 points along this continuum. Think of them as 5 chalks in a wheel. And let me ask you the question, how many times do you go around this loop? Once? Doubtful it's only once. I want you to be ready to apply this process as many times as it takes to drive you out of the rut. If you think about it, like I said, as a wheel with 5 chalks on it, and as you're pushing up one time around, maybe you're not out of the rut yet. Another time around, you're getting closer. Another time out of the rut, you're almost to the summit. You turn it one more time and you're on the plateau of creative expression. So you do it as many times as necessary for the creative idea to emerge. So we're going to unpack each of these 5 stations, actually 6 because we're beginning with a problem, and we're going to look at tools to do what I didn't tell you what to do in the earlier session. When we met this afternoon, we established that your thoughts are in ruts, and we established that you think in certain patterned ways, but I didn't give you any solutions to that. It was kind of a weird session. But that's because this session is all about the other side of it. How do you come up with those solutions? So let's dig in. Hey, where do creative ideas come from? Where does this, see this in my hand, my smartphone? Did this get birthed by Apple out of nowhere, out of a vacuum? No, it didn't. Some guy in a lab just didn't come up with the iPhone X. It was a long, arduous process to get here. Much further back than you think. What I'm going to show you are the direct ties, literally, that led to the iPhone that we have today. Because creative ideas don't come out of Cupertino, California. Creative ideas, this is key, creative ideas come out of the past and manifest themselves in Cupertino, California. So let me explain. In the early days of communication, right, we had something called a telegraph. Strung wires across the country, click, 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 Morse code, and people began to communicate via the telegraph. Now, I could have started this back even further, but I wanted to use your creativity. What could we go back to before the telegraph? Exactly right. You, in the back, I could barely hear you, but I saw your lips moving. You said Pony Express. That's exactly right. Pony Express. So the telegraph was a creative, new, transformative thought that came out of somebody asking of the Pony Express, there's gotta be a better way. See, now, I don't know, I'm just coming up with this on the fly, but what came before the Pony Express? There had to be a way to communicate from one side of the continent to the other side of the continent before the Pony Express. I would say the pioneers used stagecoach, right? That was the only way to bring a letter from the East Coast to the West Coast. Get it on a caravan, somebody that's going out west, have them take it with them, right? I don't know. But what I'm saying to you, I'm modeling something for you. I'm modeling backwards what we're gonna do right now forward. And secondly, I'm modeling for you digging deeper to find the root of the problem, right? When something comes up, always asking, is this really the root of it? Or does the root go deeper? Okay, so now that we've moved from Pony Express to telegraph, let me ask you this question. How did the telegraph improve upon the Pony Express? Speed, right? Yeah, speed, I heard that. Reliability, absolutely. What if the rider's horse died along the way? What if the rider got lost? I don't think that ever happened with the Pony Express, but what if? So there was market improvement. Somebody saw the Pony Express and said, hey, we got to do this better. And they invented the telegraph. So now somebody's looking at the telegraph and someone decides to put a speaker and a microphone on each end of the wire. And we get the telephone. Now let me ask you, what problems were solved from the telegraph to the telephone? Yeah, well, yeah, of course, yes. You get your voice. You can hear the voice, right? So now you can convey emotions. We know that today with email, how non-emotion can get misunderstood. Imagine it in Morse code, telegraph in Morse code. Now a phone could reach out and talk to another person. You could hear their emotion. You could feel the sentiment and feel their presence right there in close proximity. What else? You didn't need a skilled operator as a proxy for your message. Anytime you can take human error out of a solution, you're going to come out the other side with a better creative idea. What came after the telephone? The phonograph. Now you're saying, what? Wait, well, how does the phonograph tie in? How does playing music tie into communication? Well, the phonograph was originally invented not to play music. That was the first huge application of it, but the phonograph was the first bit of technology that could record a voice for posterity's sake. It could accurately record information for recall at a later time. So the problems it solved were obvious. The problems between the telephone and the phonograph is now we could keep the information. Then that morphed to what you thought initially of the phonograph to a music device. And then that music device then morphed to something transformational. Do you know the history of the Sony Walkman? The #1 selling device in Sony's history? Sony had been working on a way of miniaturizing a recording device. You remember the big old desktop recorders? Well, first of all, you had the reel-to-reel, right? So we could have gone from phonograph to reel-to-reel and then all the way down, but I didn't want to unpack it at that level, so I'm going right to the Sony Walkman. The Sony Walkman resulted because they were trying to miniaturize the recording device. And they were getting a modicum of success there, and they were excited about that product. But one day, The CEO was walking through one part of his factory and got a briefing on the miniaturization of the recording device. And on another day, he tours another part of his factory where he sees a failed experiment on speaker miniaturization. In his mind, something clicked and said, if we can successfully navigate the miniaturization of speakers, then we can adapt the recording device to be a recording and playing device through miniature speakers. And now you can take a recording device and a playback device with you in a very personal sense. What problems does that solve, right? You didn't have to carry around a big phonograph on your belt, right? Now you can put a Walkman there. Think about the problems that were solved. Man, those things took off and were everywhere. Everyone owned a Walkman in the day. Some of you are too young to even remember it. But everybody running, everybody walking. Less people have earbuds on today than people had Sony Walkmans strapped on their side in the day. So now the music industry has come full circle. And now you can take songs with you, you can record, you can do whatever you want to do at your leisure and take that with you in a very private way. And that led to the iPod. The iPod was a simplification of the Walkman, and it was huge. You know it, I know it. They're hard to even find anymore, but they're still around. But those early iPods solved a lot of problems. Number one, they simplified the interface. Number two, they stored way more than 30 or 60 minutes of music that a cassette tape did. They were much higher quality. All these problems were solved. Somebody had a Sony Walkman on and said, there's got to be a way to have more than 30 minutes of music without carrying multiple cassettes around. And finally, someone came up with the solution. And now we don't have to branch into all the gadgets of the Sony Walkman to iPod transition. But think about them, the early cell phones that looked like an office phone that you held up to your head. Think about the pagers, the beepers. I had one of the first beepers back in the day, right out of high school. I had a beeper. All this jockeying, all this playing to adaptively create a new product that solved problems and brought us to a new era. I'm older than many in this room, but there was a day when I had my beeper, my cell phone, and a PDA. You remember PDA? You know what that stands for? Personal Data Assistant. And I would wear two of those in my belt, put one in my pocket. It was crazy. And that led to Cupertino slamming them all together into the first iPhone, which for the first time in history solved multiple problems, one of which is looking like a cowboy with 8 things on your belt, but brought together the pager, the phone, the PDA, recording device, all these things from the past, solving all of those problems into one package. The migration to this creative idea has been hundreds of years in the making. So don't get frustrated when you can't come up with a new creative idea. Look to the past, learn from what others have done, and bring it forward. So let's talk about that. What does all this have to do with innovative and creative thinking? Okay, so let's talk about this. Let's have a discussion. I've got 3 things I want to discuss, and then we're going to watch a video. For our online listeners, I'm going to cut I'll ask the questions, but I'll cut the discussion part out, and I cut the video out. We don't play the video on our online versions. If you want to see the videos in this presentation, you'll need to come to a live event that I'm speaking at. All right, so let's talk about it. What does all of this have to do with innovation and creative thinking? Does it say anything about why creative thinking is hard? Okay, lastly, what do we need to be able to do to think creatively and or to innovate? Okay, so let's watch this video. Take notes because we're going to discuss it later. All right, so we're back from a very good time talking about the video, and we're going to work through the solutions wheel. All right, so we're going to begin with a problem. Truly identify the problem before you focus on a solution. An ill-conceived problem leads to an ill-conceived solution. You need to look for root causes. Here are some of the tools or techniques that you can use to begin to unpack what is the real problem here. Paraphrasing. You'd be amazed at how well paraphrasing works, and it's really a simple solution, but it brings back amazing results. So here's what you do. You get the men and women you trust in a room together and you present the problem, you articulate the problem as you understand it. Then you go around the room and let the men and women that you trust that can think creatively speak into and paraphrase what you just said. Because they may see nuances in their paraphrase that you didn't even conceive of. By paraphrasing the problem in many different ways, you get different language, different nuances, keyword nuances of the problem that unpack or trigger other thoughts. It's just this little way of jumping out of your rut of thinking into somebody else's thinking. Next, restating from an alternate point of view. What does that mean? That means you shift and you say, okay, what are the points of view related to this problem? All right, so let me give you a clear-cut example that fits everybody in this room. Something about the church service, okay? You're trying to solve the problems of appeal to the church, maybe church growth or making the environment at church a more welcoming and warming environment. You each state from your point of view, so I'm the pastor, this is how I see it from my point of view. You are an attender, you state it from your point of view. You are a children's worker, you state it from your point of view, and then you go around the room and you think about everybody else's point of view that attends your service. What does the first-time visitor think about this problem? What's their perspective or point of view about it? What does the member that never gets involved, what is his point of view? What's the involved member's point of view? What about the point of view of someone who's angry at the church and they've come for the first time just to justify their position of anger? What about the husband who's being dragged there by his wife because it's the only way to bring peace into their house and he doesn't want to be there? What about the point of view of the child who for the first time is starting to understand some of the connections of Christ and grace and salvation and the love of God? Restating the problem from various points of view can be huge. Then brainstorming. Go around that table and say, okay, how do we deal with this problem? What is the real problem? Is this the real problem? The 5 whys. This is a famous technique. A lot of people use it just to say why. Ask the question why. Why is it this way? 5 whys. Just dig deep. Now, it doesn't mean you do it 5 times. You do it 3 times, you do it 103 times. You ask why enough times to where you get to the root of the problem. Okay, let me take you through a really simple 5 whys exercise and also highlight how failing to diagnose the real problem can be detrimental and cause even more problems. So someone comes to you in a panic and says, we're losing all our older folks. So immediately, without even diagnosing the problem, we come up with all these ideas. Well, let's get a new older folks leader. Let's redecorate their classroom. Let's empower one of the older folks to reach out to all the older folks and get them together. Problem solved, right? No. But you ask, why are we losing all the older folks? You unpack that. Well, they don't like the music. Okay, so what do? We strike out, we change the music to make it a little more older friendly, right? We're solving the problem. Take a poll and we ask the seniors, what kind of music do you like? Hey, let's put a senior on the worship team. But nobody asked why. So we ask why. Why don't they like the music? And it comes back, they don't like the drums. So let's get rid of the drums and let's let the bass carry the music and everything will be fine, right? No, ask the question. Why don't they like the drums? Well, because they're too loud. So if they're too loud, let's give out earplugs, right? So then the seniors can wear earplugs. Make them jump through the hoop so that we don't have to change anything. Wrong. But somebody asks the question, why? Why are the drums too loud? And then someone says, you know what? The seniors are all seated in the front of the church and it's right next to the speakers. Aha. Solution. Well, let's move the seniors. Let's have the seniors sit in the back of the church. But nobody asked why. Why are the seniors sitting up close to the speakers? Because that's where we place the handicapped seating. That's the one that's closest to the doors that come in from the handicap or from the senior parking area. So here's the aha. Reposition the speakers. Now that's just a simple example of many different diagnoses that would have led the church astray, where asking the why question 5 or 6 times, you drill down to the ultimate solution, just reposition the speakers. 5 whys. Now we're going to watch another video here. So online, you're not going to get this. I want you to take notes, and I want you to see how they get to the root of the problem by asking the appropriate questions. Remember, the premise under this point is you need to begin with the right problem. We'll come back from the video and discuss it. We just finished a great discussion about a video from Apollo 13 and how they drilled down to what the real problem was in the famous Houston, we have a problem scenario. Okay, so let's move on to the next station in this problem-solving wheel. Find out what others have done. This is your next, once you've diagnosed the problem, now you need to find out what others have done to solve it. As we explored when we moved from the telegraph all the way to the modern day smartphone, we learned that first we copy, then we create. Only God creates ex nihilo. Here's some tools and techniques to find out what others have done. Scanning. Scan the horizon. If you've got a problem, you need to scan the horizon. What have others done to solve this problem? In your everyday life, you're driving around, you see that problem in a different realm, and you say, okay, what did they do to solve the problem? You empower your leadership to scan the problem. What did they do to solve it? What did he do to solve it? What did she do to solve it? An idea journal. You're asking your leadership to keep a journal about that specific problem. A journal of their thoughts and ideas, a journal of what they discover as they find out how others have solved that problem. Rings of similarity. This is the #1 tool that I use in finding out what others have done to solve the problem and come up with a creative solution. This comes out of a book called Borrowing Brilliance by David Cord Murray. And disclaimer, it's a very secular book, but it's a brilliant book. His premise in the book is that nobody creates things out of nothing. He says, what do you do if you steal an idea from your own industry? It makes you a thief. But what do you do if you steal an idea from another unrelated industry and apply it to your industry? It makes you a hero. Borrowing brilliance. So let me unpack this rings, what I call the rings of similarity in problem solving. Because we have a problem in the church. In the church, we look at what other churches have done, and it keeps us in our rut. We need to break out of that rut. We need to rise above the rut. So here's how we do it. First, we do ask that question. In fact, let me take you through an actual event that I did with a leadership team. They wanted to know how to increase their membership. They had tried and tried to break the 200 barrier, and it had been incapable. So we set a series of meetings over 4 or 5 weeks where we brought the leadership team together to discuss each one. Now I do it that way because we talked about earlier, and we're going to talk about it again, you need that creative pause, right? So I do it over the course of many weeks when I consult, but here's how that plays out. I'll get that leadership together and say, okay, the issue at the table is increased membership. Now, what have other churches done to increase their membership? And we get the ideas around the table, but then we give them projects. Everyone at that table gets something to do. John, you go out and you check with First Baptist, wherever, find out what they did to increase their membership. Mary, you go out to that church plant out there on the east side and you figure out what they're doing to increase their membership. Hey, Justin, I'm good friends with that pastor over there on Main. I'll set up an appointment, you go over there, you talk to him, and you figure out what they're doing to increase their membership. And so what you're doing is you're empowering your leadership team to do some investigative work into finding out what exactly they are doing, not just a summary thought about what you think they're doing. You go and investigate what they are doing with the intent of bringing that back and applying it here. So then you come back the next week and the group thinks you're going to find a solution, but you're not. You're just in the first stage. You need to go out to the next ring, and that is similar organizations. Because see, you'll never find your breakout aha solution if you're only looking at others who are in the same rut as you. You need to get into people who are in their own ruts, but they're dissimilar. So then I brought them all back together and I said, okay, we talked about all the ideas that came back. Then you start with the assignments for that week and you list similar organizations that aren't churches, other nonprofits, and you assign an individual to go out and investigate what they're doing to increase their base, their volunteer base, their membership. So you say, okay, you go out to the Salvation Army and you find out what they're doing to increase membership. You go out to the Lions Club, totally secular organization. You go out to the Lions Club and you find out how they increase their membership. And then you go out to that food pantry out there and you find out how they increase their volunteers in their another nonprofit organization with similar purpose to reach people. You find out what they're doing to increase their membership. You see what you're doing? You're unpacking. You're coming out of your rut, and yes, you're going into somebody else's rut, but it's going to force you to think differently than you always think as a church person. Then you come back the next week and you discuss what you've heard and what you've thought and what the practices that people have learned about, and then you bring the ring out again. Other non-related organizations. So John, you go out and you find out how that restaurant on the corner gets more customers. Mary, you're a businesswoman, so you function in that world. Can you go to the owner of your company and ask him or her what they do to increase their customer base? How do they increase their market share? Justin, you know that business that just opened up in the strip mall down here on the corner? They're just getting started. They got the grand opening banner on there. Go find out what they're doing to increase their customer base. Then they come back the next week, full of ideas about how the world of free enterprise and commerce appeal to their customer base. And then you bring it out one more ring, the ring of nature or other, right? What are the natural, biological, physical processes we find in the universe that tie in or that serve as a metaphor for membership of an organization? So we put that out there, and let me give you what I thought, because remember, here's what's important. When you explore and unpack this method, there are no wrong answers. There are no crazy, nothing is laughable. In fact, when you start this meeting, you need to lay the groundwork and say nobody's ideas are too far-fetched. Get as crazy as you want to get. No laughing at anybody's ideas. We might find humor in it, but that's good because we need to unpack our ruts as radically as possible. So I always come to this final meeting with the catalytic question. And I do that because I'm used to this process. So I want to stimulate their thought because they don't know what to expect at this point. And so here's what I said. I said, I need someone to go out and explore. And I already knew the answer, but I said, I need someone to go out and explore how a star forms from interstellar dust over time, right? Gravity increases, the dust coalesces into a small little dust ball. Gravity, it pulls in more and more dust over millennia and millennia. It grows and grows and grows until the mass becomes so large that it presses in on itself and it combusts into a star. Star formation is a metaphor for membership. And so the ideas went around the table and it was crazy. So then someone else mentions, hey, how does a bee know to come back to the beehive? I said, that's great. I think that was Jason. I'm like, Jason, you go figure that out, do the research, come back next week and you let us know how a bee knows where the beehive. He's out there flying around all the time. How does he know to return to the hive? That's good. That's great. Always be encouraging as the leader. Then someone else said, hey, how about like it says in the Bible about the parts of the body working together? I said, that's great. I want you to read that passage this week, think about that, but I want you to think deeper than just arms and legs. I want you to think about the internal organs and how those work together to form something greater than itself. So you go research that and you come back next week and you give us a report. And then one of the guys at the table goes, oh, he was so excited. It was so funny. And he says, Mowgli. And everybody looks at him really weird. Mowgli? I said, yeah, Mowgli. It's like, okay, what about Mowgli? How did Mowgli get accepted into the wolf pack? And so there were some giggles across the table and I'm like, wait, that's brilliant. Go out and research, can a stray wolf or even a human be accepted into a wolf pack? And if so, what's the means by which that happens? And then we get together next week and we debrief it all, and you'll be at the starting base foundation of solving your deeper problem. And then that's the last week I meet with them. And then I give them that information, all that data collection over those weeks of problem solving to find their own solution. It really is a wonderful and fun exercise. Now we need to play around with our ideas. That's the next main point. You need to understand that borrowed ideas become ingredients for new ideas. So what we do in this stage is we use an existing idea to form the framework for a new idea by establishing a metaphor, extending it, and then discarding it when it no longer works. So here's some of the tools and techniques, and then we're going to do an exercise. Wisdom of the crowd, okay? Again, two minds are better than one. Get the crowd together. Let them think through the problem with you. Let them come up with their own crazy solutions and ideas to the problem. Wisdom of the crowd. Listing and drawing. This is what I like to do. I'm a lister, so I started off, many of you know I had a graphic arts business that became an ad agency that later became a web development firm. And what we used to do is we used to do listing. We would take a big white wall and we would take the 3-inch Post-it pads and we would write a word on that Post-it. And then we'd stick it on the wall. And then we'd write a word that word triggered in our mind. And we'd write that on a Post-it and we'd stick it. And then we'd write a word that word did. It was listing. We were listing related ideas and we just post them all over the wall. It was just a way, and not with the expectation that any huge solution would come out of that, but that we're unpacking our brains at a different level. And for me, I'm more of a creative type. I love to draw. I love all the graphics in these presentations. I do them myself. I've always been a creative. And so I like to draw things out because that helps me to unpack my thought. It shifts my brain from left brain logical thinking to right brain creative expression. And sometimes I find my aha there. The dictionary flip. This is my own invention, but it works really, really well. When you're at an impasse with your leaders, you're talking through new creative solutions and you can't think of anything else, grab the dictionary, just flip it open, point your finger down at a word, read that word, and try as hard as you can to make that word fit the context of what you're talking about. And you'd be amazed at the crazy rut jumping your brain does because you're trying to reconcile a completely unrelated word into your current situation. The dictionary flip. Hard to do with hard print dictionaries going away. Many people don't even have the dictionaries anymore. Mind map. If you're not familiar with mind mapping software, MindMeister is a good one. It's freeware. There are all kinds of ways to map out thought processes, and those are good techniques to play around with new ideas, to take you down different paths of thought, to get that graphically illustrated. Like I said earlier, I like to draw, but mind mapping for a less creative person is a good way to express themselves creatively and map out their thought process. And then this is one that I absolutely love. Come up with bad solutions. Remember, the purpose is we're trying to jump out of our ruts of thinking. So we take the problem and we come up with the worst possible solutions for that problem. You'd be amazed how many good ideas come out of thinking of the worst possible solution to the problem. Remember we said earlier about changing points of view? In a sense, this is a similar practice than changing your point of view as you look at a problem. You're shifting from trying to get the best case scenario to creating the worst case scenario, and it jars your thought process. It jumps you out of your rut. And then just the simple dream. What if? Considering this problem, what if we did this? What if we did that? What would happen if? What if? I just want to remind you with this graphic that your brain has the capacity to see things that aren't even there. And when you apply that to problem solving and solutions, it's amazing what your brain can come up with. What do you see in this picture? That's right, yeah. Most people say 2 triangles and 3 circles. You know what? There are really no triangles there, and there's no circles either. Your brain sees what's not really there because of assumptions that you're making. The only ink on this paper, if you will, the only designs on this screen are what amounts to 3 greater less than signs and 3 Pac-Mans, but they're arranged in a way that your brain can see something that's not even there. I want to re-instill in you that within your God-given intelligence, when put together with other people, is the solution for every single problem that the Lord allows you to wrestle through. I think about the ancients. They looked up and they saw something like this, but they didn't see this. They saw that. The constellation Leo to them was this lion in the sky. That's the kind of development that needs to take place in this stage, where you're taking a series of dots, playing around with those ideas, and creating a lion. So we're going to break now for an exercise. If you're listening on the web, we're going to come right back after the exercise is done. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to group in circles of 4 or 5 people. We're just going to give 10 minutes to this exercise really quick. And I want you to pick one of these 3, okay? The back row back there, those tables back there, I want you to take the 3rd scenario. The middle section right here, take the 2nd scenario, and up front right here, take the 1st scenario. Okay. Up front, use the military training regimen for special forces to construct a process for developing disciples of Christ. Now remember, we talked about using a metaphor and extending the metaphor until it doesn't work anymore, until it doesn't serve the purpose anymore, but just extend the metaphor. Middle section, use either the metaphor of wildfire or an epidemic to develop a process for rapidly spreading the gospel or starting new churches. In the back, use the idea of having a physical trainer to get in shape to develop a process for rejuvenating a dying church in a transitional community. Okay, go for it. All right, so we're back from that 10 minutes. We're not going to unpack that here. I'm assuming that you unpacked that at your table and you thought through some of those ideas and you've just started sparking your brain to think creatively using a metaphor, playing around with new ideas. And now a very, very important part. They're all important, but this is particularly important. I like to preface this way. I tell people when you go into a problem-solving meeting, don't expect to come out with the solution. In very rare cases, you might, but even when you think you've got that solution, you need to give your subconscious time to work. So never go into a problem-solving meeting and come out with a solution. Take a break. It might be an hour, it might be 2 hours, it might be the next day, it might be the next week. But you have to give the subconscious time to work. This is completely neglected. Most of the time, people go into a 1-hour meeting, think they can solve the problem, and then they go right out of that meeting and implement it, and it causes more problems than there were in the first place. You need to give the subconscious time to work. The incubation of ideas is crucial. It happens at the subconscious level. The creative pause is as critical to the creative process as gestation is to the birth of a child. Your mind is wired for repetitious thinking. And once we start thinking a certain way, it's hard to think otherwise. So you need to just take a break, let the mind rejuvenate, and let the thoughts mature. Just some tools or techniques, really just ideas. The main tool and technique is just find something else to do, right? Refocus, divert your attention to something else. Go on a walk or a run. Go fishing or hunting, whatever you like to do. Involve yourself in a sport. Sleep. I spoke about earlier how you go to bed with a vexing problem in your brain and you wake up and all of a sudden the answer's there. Journal. Let your creative mind flow. In my case, I draw. Then you need to move into formulating the thoughts into an idea. Here is where we begin to judge the ideas that we come up with. We've come up with all these different processes and all these different things. We find out what others have done. We play around with our ideas. We've given the subconscious time to work. And now we need to judge what we've come up with. Judgment is the result of one's point of view. The creative process requires a shifting of viewpoints and changing of current realities. Judgment is about enhancing ideas, identifying their weaknesses, identifying their strengths, eliminating the weaknesses, and building upon the strengths. Always, always working towards a better solution. Here's some tools and techniques for that. PMI. The PMI technique works really well. Get around the table and say, okay, what's a plus of this idea? What's a minus of this idea? And what is neither plus nor minus, but is really interesting that we need to discuss? PMI. 6 thinking hats, which I feel is the best tool for any of us as we're solving problems and thinking through issues. The 6 thinking hats bring together so many of these tools and techniques in one venue, and I'm going to unpack that with you in just a minute. If you think about 6 different colored hats, a blue hat, a red hat, a yellow hat, a green hat, a black hat, and a white hat, each of those hats have personalities associated with them. Now, there's 2 ways you can apply the 6 thinking hats. Let's say your leadership is in a group together. What's really important here is role play. You can all role play a certain hat together at the same time, or you can each take on the personality of one distinct hat, one color hat. And the dynamic is really pretty amazing. If you ask my preference, I prefer that there be one role play of each colored hat in the room at the same time. A lot of practitioners will say, okay, everybody put on the white hat, and then you talk and you dialogue based on the personality associated with the white hat. That's good. I'm not lessening the effectiveness of that, because that way everybody gets to experience every hat. But there's something about the dialogue when everybody has a separate hat on. So let me unpack this, you'll understand. So if you're wearing the white hat, you're think white like paper. Your focus is on information. What information do we have and what information do we need? So if we're talking about the problem, you're saying, well, we need the data for that, or we need to study that. We have to study that, and we come with that information already in hand in many times. Then there's the yellow hat. Think sunshine, like, yellow, sunshine. Focus is positive, encourages a positive view, even in negative people. What are the benefits? So this guy's role playing, oh, that's a great idea. Hey, the benefits of that would be we could all go to the beach together. Hey, the benefits of that is people would flock to our congregation. Hey, that's great. Wow, that is such a good idea. Here's the benefits. Here's the benefits. Here's the benefits. Mr. Sunshine. Then someone's wearing a black hat. Think the judge. His focus is on caution. What are the risks of that? How can this blow up? It's too easy to dwell here too long, and it's too easy to give this guy the forum, because he's gonna bah humbug everything and he's gonna shoot everything down. But you need that. You need someone speaking of the negative results of the idea. What could go wrong? Then you have the red hat. Think fire or warmth. This is the emotional guy. He advocates against, he encourages others to express their feelings with or without judgment. He's always worried about how others will react. Think fiery. He's the fiery guy in the room. He's the one pairing up with people and saying, yeah, what he said. And then he might flip and say, yeah, what he says. He's encouraging different veins of thought to unpack the people in the room even more. And then there's the green hat. Think about vegetation. Think about growth, right? The focus is growth in the green hat. Dream about how the situation could be. This hat is about growth and the future. Talk about new ideas. The main focus of the green hat is the growth of the organization. How will the decisions you're making there grow us? And then finally, the blue hat. Think sky. This is the big picture guy. His or her focus is the overview and the process. Asking each one for summaries and conclusions and decisions and how will we do it, implementation, development of systems and structures to accomplish the goal. He's the one that's maintaining. He's the command center for the room. You get all these personalities in the room to discuss the potential solution to your problem. Some shooting it down, some raising it up, some people encouraging both perspectives and both points of view, some thinking about how this is going to grow the organization, others judging it, one thinking about data, one thinking about the systems and the implementation. You get all these roles playing in a conversation, and amazing things can happen. And then finally, you need to redefine your problem and begin again. See, here's a hard reality. Our tendency is to stop too soon. You need to repeat this total process looking for an even better solution. You just keep going around the circle until you arrive where you need to arrive. Redefine your problem, re-borrow the materials, recombine the structure, re-incubate the solution, rejudge it all. Here's some tools and techniques to help you do that. Scamper. Scamper's one of my favorites. You know what? We held up the smartphone today. One of the stations there, I have to believe, I don't have any evidence for this, but I have to believe one of Steve Jobs' core principles was the use of the scamper, because you can see it play out in their product development. They would take things like taking the earphone jack off the iPhone is a simplification. It's a subtraction from what was. Everybody says, oh, that's terrible, but there's a greater vision at play. Going from the Sony Walkman to the iPod, taking off the rewind button and the play button and the stop button and the pause button and the forward button and the record button that you had to press with the play button, if you remember that, and simplifying, subtracting from that to a spin dial. Amazing leaps forward. Scamper can help us do that. And then finally, always being willing to start the entire process over to make the process, make the solution even better. So let's unpack Scamper a little bit. Scamper is basically an acronym, and it stands for 7 different approaches to the problem, right? Is there something we can substitute for this? That's the first one, substitution. Can we combine it with something else to make a better product? Think about how the Sony Walkman was the combination of a miniaturized recording device and a miniaturized speaker placed together to create the Walkman. Adapt. Can we adapt this for a new reality? Can we adapt something that we're already doing, but create a new reality for it? Adapt it to something else. Can we magnify? Can we make this bigger? Can we magnify the use of this on a grander scale? Can we put this thing to another use? This thing that we have, what else can we use it for? Think about the phonograph. Phonograph was invented to record a voice, yet it was put to another use in the recording of music, and it became more of a playback device than a recording device. What can we eliminate? Okay, I talked about subtraction earlier. Elimination is a huge part. What excess baggage is this idea carrying, and how do we eliminate that so that it doesn't hinder us moving forward? Let's simplify. You know, the old KISS analogy. Keep it simple, stupid. And then, is this something we can rearrange? How do we rearrange to reinvent? A lot of times reinventing is simply rearranging the things, the people that we already have in place, but rearranging them, reassigning them for a different result. And then hopefully through that process, even if you have to start over a few times, your concrete, solid, empowered, creative idea emerges. So here's some takeaways that I don't want you to miss. Creative ideas solve existing problems. Creative ideas are built upon things that already exist. Someone sees the same thing that everyone else sees, but looks at it in a different way. Modifies, adds, takes something away, finds a new use, combines it with something else, etc., etc. 3 historic examples of this are the Sony Walkman and the personal entertainment system. We talked about that already. Cockleburs and Velcro. You may or may not know this, but legend has it that Velcro was invented by an individual who got really tired of pulling cockleburs out of their socks. And then the spinning wheel and the circular saw. Legend has it that Sarah Babbitt in 1779 created the first circular saw. She was an American Shaker. I don't know if you know what the Shakers are. They were the charismatic Quakers, and they were called Shakers. That's absolute truth. But she invented the circular saw. She also invented the first false teeth, by the way, but she saw the spinning wheel, the head of the spinning wheel, and she thought, hey, if we put teeth on this thing, we can create the circular saw. So let's make this personal. In what areas would it help if you were more creative? Next, identify a key problem that, if solved, would make significant difference in realizing the mission or vision of your church. Ask yourself this: do you think it is possible to even solve that problem? Well, I hope after today you realize it absolutely is possible. And then lastly, what difference would it make in your church if that problem was solved? We're going to go to a time of questions and answers now. If you are listening online, the information is there to contact me. You can contact me at my website, curtis.net, or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. I put leadership videos there all the time, /Rick B. Curtis, or you can reach out to me with my email address, rickcurtis@curtis.net. Thank you, everybody. God bless.